Welcome to No Romance Without Finance. Today, our guest is Cara Wall-Scheffler. She is a professor and co-chair of the Department of Biology at Seattle Pacific University. She received her master's and PhD in biological anthropology from the University of Cambridge, during which she researched the hunting and mobility strategies of early humans. In addition to teaching and chairing, Dr. Wall-Scheffler's research is widely cited, focusing on the trade-offs inherent in how people move their physical environment and how populations balance access to resources, thermal regulation, and reproduction. In this episode, Dr. Scheffler breaks down the groundbreaking studies that reveal that women are hunters too, and not just gatherers. We also talk about how cultural narratives are shaped by those in power with the intention to stay in power. And we highlight how the success of society relies heavily on the contributions of women. We also talk about where our ideas of masculine and feminine traits come from and how they vary and contradict across cultures and time. Hi, Cara. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I am so excited to have you on because if anyone's ever listened to the podcast, they know that I love having academics on the show. And the reason that I do is because you guys come from a place of, especially you, of science, right? You
Mhm.
guys have done the research, you know what you're talking about. It's not just some like pie in the sky thing as far as the
Yeah.
things that you're saying. And that's why I'm so excited to have you on. And for the listeners, how I
Mm.
discovered Cara is I was reading an article which is truly a game changer about a study that was done on indigenous tribes. And I'll have Cara tell you more about it. I mean, she knows more about the study than I did, about how we used to have the misconception that men were hunters in society. And since we have the misconception that men were hunters, that that also meant that the women were gatherers, and this really plays gender roles as far as men are hunters, so now they're supposed to be the leaders, the women are supposed to be the followers, the women are the ones that should be at home, taking care of the kids, while the men should be the providers going out and working. And this
Mhm.
study completely and totally just turns this notion on its head. And Cara was quoted saying some amazing things in this article. So I want to turn it over to you, Cara. Please tell the listeners a little bit about yourself. I mean, we talk about you in the intro, obviously, but about yourself and how you came about this study.
Yeah, thank you. I have been I come at most questions from the perspective of mobility. I'm really interested in how people use their environment in order to be successful, essentially. And in different cultures, in different places around the world, that kind of success looks differently. But I'm really interested in how people gain access to the resources that they've decided they need in order, usually to have family or community or something like that. And so I have been studying different parts of that question for over 20 years now. And I have been focused in a variety of ways on how women, in particular, gain access to resources. And I have studied this in a couple of different ways, from how they move, how they walk, and how they interact with their families, with their children, with other resources. And what I kept coming up against was this idea that women don't move a lot, that
Mm.
women are, stay still or provide a certain kind of care, or might not be good at what the men do. And this idea really concerned me because even though this theory kind of existed, when I actually was looking on the ground at specific studies or specific cultures or specific kinds of data, over and over and over again, I found data that women were very mobile, that women were always gaining access to resources, that women
Mm.
changed what they did at different parts of, at different parts of their life choices in order to best support their family or best support their community. And so then I was sort of, I felt like there was a little bit of a tension between what the sort of overarching textbook notion of women's roles were and all of this accumulation of data that suggested that women were very flexible, very dynamic, always working,
Mhm.
always contributing, always helping. And so I wanted to sort of take all of these little individual studies that I had found anecdotally and actually figure out if there was a broader pattern that could then reshape this sort of overarching textbook style notion of how women contribute to their community and in their different families and cultures. And so I went out with my students and I just started collecting everything that I could find from sort of small scale foraging communities. And when the study actually articulated who was contributing, what they were contributing, when they were contributing, we just took note of it and then came up
Wow.
with, yeah, then sort of were able to sort of say, actually, look, in most studies that actually tell you specifically who is doing the labor, in those places, women are doing the labor. Men are doing the labor too, but women are always involved, always included, always participating. They are not sort of passive um,
Mhm.
uh, entities for whom like everything exciting just passes them by.
This is really great information. So, if that in fact is the case, if
Hmm.
we've always been contributing to society, we haven't been the ones that are just waiting for the man to bring home the bacon, right?
Yeah,
Waiting for the
yeah,
man to go out and bring us food. We were out there hunting. We
yeah,
just along with everybody else. Where did
absolutely.
this Jedi mind trick notion come from that we that we are supposed to let the man lead and the man were the hunters and
Yeah,
the women were relegated to the home? Do you know
yeah.
where this came from?
Um, I I mean, I think that we have ideas about how people who are in power like to keep the power. And I think that this is sort of a classic example of this. I mean, even in the book, Man the Hunter, there are a whole series of stories about women hunting.
Correct.
Even in the book, Women the Gatherer, there are a whole series of stories about women hunting. So
Correct.
we've
Correct.
always known that this is true.
Hmm.
Um, but I feel like it's just been glossed over time and time again so that the people who, want to be the leader, want to be the provider, want all eyes to turn to them, they just
Hmm.
perpetuate this by sort of pretending that this is the way things were, and therefore the way things had to have been, and therefore the way things should continue to be. They're just picking and choosing their narratives,
Right.
and sort of discounting everything else as just a just so story or an anecdote or something that doesn't happen very often or whatever it might be. And that's really the purpose of this particular research you're citing, is to say it it's not an anecdote if everybody does it.
Right, right. Exactly. Exactly. And I think, one of the biggest reasons that a lot of people still believe this narrative is
Mhm,
because of religion. So
mhm,
a lot of religious texts talk about, men are the leaders,
mhm,
and the woman should let the man lead and whatnot.
mhm,
And I get a lot of those comments
mhm.
anytime that I say anything about this, that, well, the
Yeah,
Bible says, the Bible says.
interesting.
And while, I I I appreciate everybody wanting to practice whatever religion they want to practice,
Mm,
but science says differently, right?
mm. Well, and I mean, It's funny. It's actually funny that you bring that up because literally an hour ago, I was having the exact same conversation about the Bible, that actually the Bible doesn't really say that. You're
Okay.
picking and choosing specific stories, whereas there are numerous stories in biblical text and in multiple religions about women saving the day over and over and over
Mm,
again. And
right.
so suffice it to say, whatever you choose, I think that people need to always, I mean, this I think is my overarching idea all the time. Go back to the data, because culture
Hmm.
glosses over for whoever is currently in power in that culture. And
Right.
so science has said things wrong, religion has said things wrong, but when you go back to the text, go back to the data, then all of a sudden you really are able to see, look at all of these stories. Look at all of these stories of women contributing to their community, and women, sort of making sure that everybody has what they need so that the community can be successful.
Wow, that's so interesting that you said that. I'm not a very religious person. I have read the Bible, and you and you're right. There are stories in the Bible about women saving the day, but that's never
Yeah.
talked about, right?
Why
And
don't we talk about it? I know
right.
that's discouraging.
Yes, it really is discouraging. And, people pick and choose as to
Yes.
what they want to believe regarding the texts, right?
Yeah.
In anything. And that's actually one of the reasons that I'm not religious, is because I'm not a picker and chooser. I'm like, you
Yeah.
either are going to believe the whole thing, or I'm just not going to believe it at all, right? Because I can't say page one is cool, but page
Yeah.
seven is not.
Yeah.
Do you know understand what I'm saying?
I,
So but
absolutely.
that's really important that you brought that out up about the Bible. So, can we just kind
Yeah.
of get into the study? Can you please tell the listeners what this study says and what the implications are for us?
Yeah. So, and I think maybe if we have time, I can mention what the study doesn't say, because
Absolutely.
there are some things that this particular paper can't do everything.
Absolutely. Sure.
So, the purpose of this paper was to identify all of those stories that had been tossed to the side as anecdote.
Okay.
And so we went careful. So I think there are two pieces. One of which is that people actually don't hunt as much as everyone talks about. And so
Mhm.
there's a lot of conversation about how we like looked at a massive database of people and language groups and cultures all over the world, and we gleaned it down to not very many, sort of just fewer than 80, because there aren't a lot of people for whom they hunt all the time.
Mhm.
Hunting is actually quite rare. People do lots of other things for food that's available year round. They fish. They do,
Right.
many people just do a lot of sort of scale agriculture. They also just forage very, very widely. And so there's all these other amazing ways that humans gain access to nutrients besides hunting. And so I think that's a very important thing to say. Then there are studies where we do talk about hunting, but we just say the hunter. The hunter goes out, or the group goes out, or the family goes out, but they don't
Right.
actually identify who in the group is going on the trip. And so we couldn't use any of those studies. So
Okay.
then we finally gleaned down to this group of studies that specifically tell you, either in sentences or in data tables, who has hunted. And because I study mobility, I'm interested in how people leave their home and then come back to their home while they're gaining access to nutrients. We're interested in who was out and about in order to bring in hunted game to the community.
Mhm.
And so, of those groups who purposefully hunt at least sometime during the year, and they tell us exactly who is doing the hunting,
Mhm.
80% of those groups have women and men, and sometimes even children hunting.
Wow. Wow.
So most groups have options about who is going to go out.
Whew, that really tells us a lot because you're not assuming, right? It's not just you're not taking into consideration data that isn't clear about who
Yep,
hunted.
that's right.
And who's to say? I mean, if you were to take that data, if that data was available, maybe 100% hunted. We don't know, right?
Yeah,
But we know that 80% were hunters, and that is
yeah,
the majority.
yeah.
And so this narrative that
Mm,
women, that men were the hunters and women were the gatherers, how does
yeah.
that reflect in today's society? And what implications does that have on women today?
Yeah. Well, I think so there are two sort of important things, I think. One is that I definitely want people to know that culture always changes,
Mhm.
and culture is flexible based on the environment in which you find yourself. And so, some of the discussion about this paper has been like when things happen or at what time period did women start hunting? Like when guns came, did women start hunting with bows and arrows? Like what were there technological innovations that allowed just humans to hunt generally?
Sure.
And we see like, some of these small scale groups that we looked at, they've been studied for hundreds of years. And so to expect that a culture remains static, that taboos and what is normal and formalized and who's made, to expect that that would have been the same for hundreds of years, that
Mhm.
is a false narrative as well. Every group is dynamic, whether or not there have been migrations or settlers or climate or new food sources, or there are no longer bison and so we're eating deer, or whatever it's going
Mhm.
to be. There is always flexibility in how humans manage their environment. That is
Okay.
first and foremost. And then secondly, quite clearly, there is always room for participation at every level.
Mhm.
So women are always involved in the allocation and acquisition of food and resources when those food and resources are necessary for survival. And of course, in this is going to be true if you're a small scale foraging group. This is going to be true if you're an agriculturist. This is going to be true in sort of urban settings.
Mhm.
If you don't have female participation, then almost always your group is going to suffer.
That was That wow, that just blew my mind. Yes, you're absolutely right. Is that, our survival has been dependent, or our success in survival has been dependent in women participating, right?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
so and so to say that, the man should be the breadwinner, right? And
Mm,
the woman should stay at home
mhm,
is not something that's even, and I don't like to use this term, but it's used a lot, that's
mm.
natural, right?
Right, right.
Because a lot of the rhetoric is that, well, and men are natural leaders and hunters, so it's
Yeah,
natural for them to want to lead. It's natural for them to tell you what to do. I mean, that's the fact that men are hunters is actually used to give men a pass as to why they are unfaithful in relationships. Men
yeah,
are hunters, so they can't help themselves but go hunt other women. Um, and and then on the flip side is, you have women relegated to the inferior roles of being in the home, not
mm,
contributing, and
mm,
that in itself, if you think about it, in itself isn't so bad, but
mm.
it becomes bad when the ramifications of a woman not contributing
Right.
happen,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think
I mean,
go ahead, please.
no, go ahead. I mean, I think that both of those things are true, and I think that, um, I think that the narrative that there was a single best way to be a human community, that narrative is completely false. From the
Right.
earliest evidence that we have of Homo sapiens, the earliest evidence is of diversity. That is literally the way that we know that humans are currently like in existence, is a social cultural diversity. And so some idea that there was, we sort of joke about the paleo diet, there, like that there ever was like a paleo diet or a paleo
Mm-hmm.
culture or a paleo like division of labor
Mm-hmm.
based on some notion. There was never one. There was never
Right.
one thing. And I think that I mean, that goes both ways. I think that you have men who are gifted working with children,
Sure.
gifted in forms of education. And I
Sure.
think to make some sort of suggestion that that's not providing, it's not providing to, to follow your gifts in that way, is just as hurtful as sort of saying like this woman is clearly gifted in
Mm-hmm.
leadership, clearly gifted in math and science. Obviously, to be the best community, you need people to follow their gifts to the fullest and not have this sort of fake notion that they're not living up to sort of their evolutionary, history or whatever.
Correct.
Just there was nothing like that in our history.
Right. And where do you think then that, where do you think this notion of feminine traits and masculine traits come
Yeah.
in? Because I
I
hear
mean,
that a lot.
yeah, it varies all the time. It's,
Hmm.
I mean, it's actually like a sort of a game that I know that the director of women's studies here, I know that she plays with her students. And I've played it with some of my students before as well. If you sort of like draw a line down the middle of a page and you say sort of masculine traits and feminine traits, and then you sort of say, okay, so what do you think is masculine and feminine today? Let's now compare and contrast with like a different culture, or let's compare and contrast with a different time point even in American history, or let's
Hmm.
compare and contrast. And I mean, we make these up, and
Right.
then we often solidify them by saying that that's the way it used to be. And either if you say that's the way it used to be because of like some sort of, because of an evolutionary past, or if you say that's the way it should be because of a religious past, I mean, either way, there was never that past.
There
And
wasn't.
so, no. So either you say, we think that this creates a functional society to have traits this way, okay.
Hmm.
Or you say, actually, some humans are going to be more nurturing and some humans are going to be more ambitious. And we should just let you, sort yourself out, depending on those intuitions. I think then you have the ability to potentially create a slightly more functional society where, I mean, I think that at least for me, I would like to feel like people can reach their potential.
Correct.
And
Whatever it
I
may
think
be.
whatever it may be,
Right.
exactly, whatever it may be. And so I think that you have to have enough fluidity in those notions in order to allow people to reach their potential. But I'm an anthropologist, I'm not a sociologist, and I
Sure.
think that sociologists do a much better job of sort of articulating like where some of these notions come from, and how we can work together as a culture to change them.
Yes. And, this whole, again, notion of, well, this is a masculine trait or feminine trait. I mean,
Mhm.
I've been called masculine my entire life.
Yeah.
That you're very masculine. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? Because I'm
Yeah.
driven, because
Yeah.
I don't allow people to walk all over me, because I right because I want
Yeah.
to succeed, because I want to provide for myself.
Yeah.
That's a masculine trait. I'm like, I don't know. I think those are pretty great traits to have, period. Right.
Yeah.
And men don't have a monopoly on the traits that really allow us to succeed in life and allow us to progress. And it seems like the masculine traits are are the traits utilized that will allow people to succeed and go further in their career, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think in especially um in a workplace where you do have to put yourself forward, tell people that those are your ideas, convince
Hmm.
other people to follow you so that you
Yes.
can sort of take the group forward. I think that in a workplace like that, absolutely, we often in our sort of the current culture in which we find ourselves, I think that we often do say that those leadership skills are like whatever, more natural, more
Sure.
intuitive for men or
Sure.
something along those lines, which of
Right.
course is really silly.
Yep. So, what would you say to there's a counter argument that goes, which I really don't think is an argument, but I'd like your opinion on
Mhm.
this,
Yeah.
where they say, well, you know what, society has flourished under this notion that men are leaders, right? And that men are supposed to be the leaders, and the women are really supposed to take care of the children, like these gender roles. The society has
Mhm.
flourished during these gender roles. So
Mhm.
to change the gender roles is scary. I mean, who's to say if there's going to be a fall of the nuclear family, the
Yeah.
fall of, and I'm using air quotes, of society if
Yeah.
we stray from these gender roles.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I don't think that that's true because there are so many ways to be successful in terms of what it means to be a found family, and successful in terms of what it means to be a culture in which children are protected and educated. Um, Honestly, as far as I can tell, the cultures that do a really good job with children are cultures where there is just there's more care, but that care comes from a variety of different places. And
Hmm.
so in order for children to feel loved and safe, you don't have to have a single parent focus on them 24/7. Like that's not the only way or even
Sure.
the best way for a child to feel loved and accepted.
Hmm.
Many cultures have versions of daycare where some people take the kids on Monday, a different family takes the kids on Tuesday, like someone takes them on Wednesday,
Interesting.
and there's a routine without that
Right.
routine being a single person. And I think
Interesting.
generally educating and paying childcare workers is like a
Hmm.
surefire way to have a successful community. If you want to have a successful
Absolutely.
community, the people who touch the lives of your children should be paid a living wage. Like
Yes.
there's there's no question that communities that create, kindergartens and preschools for everybody,
Hmm.
um, that those cultures aren't doing extreme. I mean, obviously, I guess we always use Scandinavia as the poster child of
Hmm.
success. And if
So
you
tell us
have
about that. Tell us
free
about
childcare for
Scandinavia.
all, well, I mean, there's everybody has access to childcare and medicine. And so
For
in
free.
those for well, I mean, you pay taxes,
Right, you pay
but yes,
taxes, correct. Sure.
but yes, the taxes are commiserate about whatever your salary is, but
Mhm,
regardless of what you do and what your salary is, you have full access to childcare. Your child is educated for as long as your child wants for free, and
wow.
any metal like tumbling down off of the tree is paid
Yep,
for. Like you can
right.
explore and be a kid and use your body without your parents worried that if you break your leg, they can't afford to take you to the ER.
Mhm,
And so there is like this emotional freedom, and then there is this sort of social freedom that your child is safe while you're at work. And so women and men and everyone gets to go to their job and not have to worry about their child.
and how is that manifesting in the success of the society? How is Scandinavia more successful than other societies?
Well, they're every society, I think, has an ability to be successful.
Sure.
But I think in the way that, for example, we, or like at least potentially me in America,
Mhm,
measure success partly because of my age. I measure success in terms of innovation.
right.
And so that is a quality. So innovation, and then I guess I would say safety.
Mhm,
So do the people feel safe to use their environment, to go to the store, to go jogging at 5 in the morning and not be assaulted? Like these are the kinds of things. And then
wow.
do you go to your workplace and act in a creative way? Can you interact with
Mhm,
people well and feel like your ideas are heard? Can you push your discipline, your technology, your interests further and build on previous knowledge, because your worries are not in your brain. All that's in your brain is your active creative sensibilities. And so, yes, we know that in Scandinavia, people make huge breakthroughs technologically, and
Yes.
innovatively, because
Yes.
their worry, that sort of pyramid you learned in kindergarten or whatever about like how
Yep.
we structure safety, that is all taken away from them. And so all they have to do is think about whatever they feel their gifts are. And so, yeah, they do a really good job at what they're doing.
Wow. Again, and another thing that blew my mind is that I never thought about how much people worry about their children. See, I don't have children, but I
Mhm.
never really thought about,
Yeah.
yeah, if you don't have decent childcare, you're worried about your child
You
and
are.
healthcare, right? So all
Yep.
of that is always in the back of your mind. And when you're
That's right.
freed of that, then you could
Yeah.
be a lot more creative in
Yeah.
anything that you do, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
And so I guess my final question is, after this
Mhm.
research has come out, what are the next
Yeah.
steps? Where
Yeah.
where is this research taking us?
Yeah. Well, because of some of the feedback, I think that I wasn't necessarily planning on following this trajectory very much further. I was sort of going to go back and do some other things with my overarching interest in how women move across landscapes. But there have been sort of enough questions and ideas that have been raised throughout, like just from people as well as other anthropologists, that I feel
Hmm.
like there are definitely some more things to work on. And I think that whereas our initial paper was just very like summative, it was,
Right.
this is on average, this is what we found. This is like it, our database was like yes or no, this
Hmm.
or that.
Hmm.
But there are these underlying stories that each one of those different studies represents. And how often do women go out? Why do women go with tools that might be different from their husband? Like, when do women choose to put their baby on their back and go hunting versus when do women choose to like put their child in a safe place for the day and they just want to go hunting just with their husband for the day or something like that?
Right.
And so I think there are additional narratives that can provide contextual layers for this sort of big picture shift that we now have. And I am quite interested in following some of these stories a little bit deeper to provide people with the specific examples of each of these
Right.
different groups.
I don't know how you could not be interested. I'm not, you're like, well, I just wanted to go back to my old research. Are you kidding? Like, I want you to follow this path. I want you to follow this damn path
Yeah,
and let us know where it takes us, because I
I
just
will
think
do.
that the more digging that we
Yeah,
do, the more understanding we'll have.
yeah,
And I want to know one way or the other. I'm not just
yeah,
like wanting it to be skewed in the benefit of women, but I'd
yeah.
like to know one way or the other. And this is so interesting for everyone, especially
Mm,
since, I feel like this is the biggest Jedi mind trick. And we've just been drinking this Kool-Aid,
yeah,
which really impedes women in their success, impedes, and I
yeah,
think you said this, women's
yeah,
reproductive rights. I mean, there's
yeah,
so
absolutely.
much that goes into this
Yeah,
notion that men were hunters and women were gatherers, that it's
yeah.
just complete BS. So please continue your research. We
Thank
are
you.
so honored that you were able to join this podcast. I love having people of your stature on, and you really are a true inspiration to me and to
Yeah.
the other women out there. You're a trailblazer. Please keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And once you get some more information, we'd love to have you back on the show.
Yeah, I would love to come back and tell you all the stories.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cara. Thank you for the listeners. Please make sure that you subscribe and rate our podcast. That's the way we keep this thing going. And until next time, and never forget that a man is not a financial plan.